Good evening, Nadine. I hear you've got snow over there in the UK.
Well, I had it here in the south of the UK yesterday. You can't see the other window behind me, but the rain has washed it all away within about 24 hours. So we're okay down in the south, but I think the north is now blanketed nicely. So as always in the UK, we probably won't be able to handle it, and there'll probably be traffic jams and everybody panicking.
Schools closed.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, for our viewers, I'm going to give you a quick background, viewers, to Nadine Bloxham. She has been in the world of aluminium for, I don't know, Nadine, for as long as I've been in the world of aluminium, so it's probably 10 years further than that. But we first met in Abu Dhabi in 2016 when you were arranging a conference there, and that was part of your role as editor of Aluminium International Today. And then you also convened the Future Aluminium Forum, and which I spoke at in both Milan and Warsaw, and helped and sat on your steering committee. And then recently, last year, you sort of deserted that ship a bit. You're still the editor of Aluminium International Today, and you took up a new position with the UK Aluminium Federation. And one of the interesting things is that its membership, your title's membership and sustainability manager. And that's the first time sustainability has been in a job title at the Federation. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep. First time for everything. Yep.
And tell me, how did that role develop? Because I think you were part of the development of the role, weren't you?
Yes, exactly that. So obviously, my background within Aluminium International. So, and you're right, Geoff, I think it's just over 10 years, I think now, which is a bit scary that I've been involved in aluminium. I started out in the glass industry, but still with Quartz Business Media for Glass International magazine. So then switched allegiance completely over to aluminium and all things lightweight material. To kind of developed that role. Obviously saw a lot more interest as the years progressed as well, within the last 5 years, I'd say, into this sustainability movement and the industry developing more of a sustainability strategy. So with more and more kind of content coming in and more products and projects being launched that obviously were leading the sector into these kind of greener transition, I became more interested in what it actually meant for the industry. And from an Aluminium International perspective, we were then showing a lot more kind of content around where the industry was going with this. So as well as developing the Future Aluminium Forum, which you mentioned, which is more focused on the digitalisation and kind of Industry 4 areas. Obviously, there's a tie-in there with sustainability because a lot of the technologies are then geared around how to help sustainability efforts as well, and emission reduction and lots of things like that. But we began before that with Alu Solutions, which I think is obviously where we met. So that was especially designed to try and touch on the solutions within aluminium manufacturing and processing that are more sustainable. The event itself, I think maybe we were probably a little bit too early for it. That was 2016, and it didn't really get as much of a reception as we thought it would. Like I say, I don't think there was the development quite there yet, and I think it was more that the industry knew what they were supposed to be doing, but weren't really geared up for it quite then. So over the recent years, then the launch of sustainable industrial manufacturing in Europe, the SIM brand, was kind of designed more to then bring in the collaborative approach across heavy industries and across manufacturing industries, because I started to see that the aluminium sector was really ploughing ahead with everything that it was doing, but it was really beneficial to actually bring in these other sectors and see where we could pick and choose certain elements from as well, because obviously we're all trying to reach the same net zero targets and goals and things, so why not share these kind of ideas? So SIM was born, but then a move more with, like, say, into the UK Aluminium Federation came up. It was something I was very passionate about because I've obviously worked with a lot of the members and a lot of the industry in the UK already with my role of Aluminium International Today. So I was really keen to be able to continue across both. So consulting on Aluminium International is still fantastic because I still get to kind of be involved more from the international side and the primary element, because obviously you don't get too much of that in the UK with only one smelter. But yeah, my role at Alpha was specifically created to not only then help focus on recruiting new members and kind of retaining the existing ones, because thankfully they've grown exponentially in the last couple of years. I think there's over 200 members now within Alfed, which is really, really great to see. But one area that Alfed was keen to offer more value to partners and members was sustainability. So kind of, as we all know, and I'll keep championing aluminium throughout this, but aluminium is ideally positioned to help UK industry as it moves towards more sustainable supply chains. And so my role, therefore, was to focus on kind of outlining Alfed's sustainability strategy in line, hopefully, with a larger UK industrial strategy, and also adhere to the 2050 roadmap, which we've sort of developed over the last couple of years. And this will also then help with working with members to develop programmes and anything that sort of directly impacts the future of the circular economy in the UK. So, bit of a strange balance with membership and sustainability, but it does tie together.
Right. Before we get down into sort of where the rubber meets the road and what some of your members are doing and what Alfed's doing, aluminium is one of the hard to abate sectors. It's actually one of the big polluters on the planet, but it's also what I call the beautiful metal. And would you give us for the viewers there who are wondering why aluminium and why it's important to the supply chains going forward, would you give your elevator pitch, your 30 seconds of why aluminium is the beautiful metal and it's going to help us to get to industrial sustainability and to zero carbon 250?
Yeah, okay, right. 30 seconds on the clock then. But I could probably talk all morning if I needed to. Main points, obviously, to break it down, it's an affordable, highly recyclable, infinitely recyclable even material that supports a global circular economy. It's the lightweight opportunities not only help with regards to such a huge impact on just lightweighting emissions, anything to do with technologies with regards to development in EV, electric vehicles, and more sustainable cities as well, looking at the kind of architectural opportunities that aluminium possesses. But also, yes, we have a huge emission output with regards to producing primary aluminium, but I think we've touched on this many times, but 5% of the actual process of aluminium. No, I've completely messed it up as well now.
No, you've got... Yeah, we were talking about it before. Sorry.
We can leave this if we need to. I'll get the figures right.
No, and I'll help you there. It's what Nadine's saying is that recycling aluminium only takes 5% of the energy required to originally make it. So aluminium's the fifth most plentiful surface metal in the world, but it doesn't exist in metallic form by itself. So it needs to be smelted, and that's where the pollution comes in. The CO2 emissions is that, and it's not from the process itself. It's actually from the aluminium smelters using coal-fired power stations, and if we could move them to more renewables, then it becomes a much cleaner. And there's, we won't get too much into primary aluminium because you've only got one in the UK left, Lochaber. I've been there. I've been to Fort William. I went there on a sunny day, and everyone said, it's the first day in a year that the sun was out. But it runs off hydropower, and I know that they were thinking about putting some wind in there, and so, but recycling. And I was looking at your website, Alfed's website today, and I noticed that you've used the figure 75% of all the aluminium ever produced in the world since we started producing 125 is still in circulation. Yeah. And so, and that's storing energy for future generations. Some of it is fossil fuels, but it's not gone. It's like those window frames and things like that. They're there for 70 years, and then they can be recycled, and with only 5% of the energy. So so that our future generations don't have to pay the carbon penalty that the planet did originally to make it. Yeah. And recycling now, the UK is really going well on recycling. Can you just talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, well, exactly that. I mean, the fact that we do only have the one smelter within the UK, and a lot of the aluminium that we do produce in the UK is exported anyway. But yeah, the recycling area, and a lot of our members within Alfed are recyclers or are helping to develop more technologies around recycling and creating this closed loop. So obviously we've realised that as with all the changes recently, with everything going on, Brexit-wise, COVID-wise, everything that's kind of impacted us over the last few years especially, we need to build on this closed-loop recycling agenda, basically, just to make sure that as an island and as an industry, we can support ourselves. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of technology and development going into the industry, but I think there's also a lot of challenges with regards to how we look at and manage things like our dross, the dross waste, everything surrounding that. There's certain issues that I think our members are very aware of, and our members are very keen to kind of work towards and support, making sure that we can manage that, and we can make sure that we're able to continue recycling to the kind of numbers that we need to be recycling to. So there's certain things across that area that still need work in, and we then still need the support either from Europe with regards to sending our dross, or we need to look at dross technologies and developing those within the UK as well, so that we can really kind of build that up.
Can just give us a quick description of what dross is for those people, our audience, who may not know?
So obviously when you're using or remelting aluminium within a furnace, there is a layer of, it's called dross or salt slag, or there's lots of different names and terminology for it. But when the furnace is then skimmed, you need to remove that dross, but the dross can still be recycled back into the supply chain. But it's just a very hazardous material to begin with. So there's quite a lot it will have metals in it, and different metals and impurities in it. Yeah. That's why you're skimming it off the top. Yes. Yeah. So it's still useful, but it'll be, because aluminium, to make it harder for things like tops of cans, is put with other alloys. And so when you remelt it, you get these other metals that dross, and you're pulling out the pure aluminium, or as pure as you can. Yeah. So yes. So that needs to be done with regards to salt. That also gathers. So That's probably one of the main challenges.
And you I want to talk about the sort of the pathway to zero carbon 2050, because as you know, I co-authored a paper, and you published it as the editor of Aluminium International today, for the whole sector, which dealt mostly with primary aluminium. But I see Alfred, in your you've set out some actions that need to be undertaken, and I'll read these if you don't mind. They are a closed loop supply chain development, and whole life design innovation, and national recycling strategy. Now, you touched on the recycling strategy, but can you just tell me what's happening on the ground? What does this mean? Like, I've always got this thing that I'm no more blah blah blah, to quote Greta Thunberg. And so in the simplest possible terms, can you describe what that actually is going to look like, and on the ground, and what it means, and what's happening today?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, and it actually is still surrounded by quite a lot of confusion from not just Alfred members, but from UK industry and other industries within the UK as well. So one thing we're working with our members towards, and hopefully over the next few months, in gearing up for a dedicated sustainability forum with members on the 1st of June, is looking at where we need to devise a framework. We've been working with a number of trusted sustainability suppliers within Alfred, so we're trying to build up a kind of handful. We don't want to go too much, because there are a lot of carbon consultancies out there, and we're all doing the same job, all doing I'm sure a brilliant job, but it's trying to work out which ones are really going to be beneficial to helping our sector, and where we're then finding the right information and moving forward with it. So a lot of the confusion is around the differences between embedded carbon offsetting, and carbon footprint. So a lot of members are kind of coming to us and saying, we're looking at doing a carbon report. We need to find out what products and how much carbon is embedded in certain extrusion products or fenestration products and things. So they're obviously being asked from further down the supply chain and from their clients and their customers to now kind of prove these figures and statistics. So from our side, we can then see that actually there is this need to start more the grand ideas of a sustainability strategy are great, but we actually need to start by building a framework, picking out maybe 4 or 5 areas, like I say, sort of, the embedded carbon, emissions reduction, looking at kind of carbon offsetting, areas that are then going to hopefully help us to reach the milestones that are expected, and the legislative kind of requirements as well. But it's going to mean also making sure that we are shaping the UK industry as best as we can in order to achieve these milestones, but then working with government, working with regulators to make sure that these milestones aren't going to keep moving and things aren't going to keep changing, so that we can at least get ourselves in a good position to be proving certain data, proving certain statistics and figures around our industry, and hopefully that will set us in good stead to be able to start then actually making some changes and moving towards these kind of net zero targets. So yeah, we're still you're right, it's very much now we need to cut through all of the kind of uncertainty that's out there on what people are doing. So it's how we actually take a step back, strip it back, and kind of say, right, let's focus on these areas, and hopefully that can create a good pathway for now as well.
Yeah. And I was thinking, and we talked earlier before, that one of the reasons UK is such a good recycler of scrap. I mean, you export 500,000 tonnes from one of my bits of research. You might have an update on that figure. 500,000 tonnes of aluminium scrap you've recycled, and you only import something like 638,000 tonnes of aluminium. So you're almost a net producer in terms of scrap, and which is really valuable, and helps the planet a lot. That 500,000 tonnes, if you had to produce that, would have 20 tonnes of CO2 per tonne of aluminium if it was coming from China. So that's a massive amount of CO2 savings. But do you think actually not having an industry, a smelting industry now, is helping you recycle? Will the UK recycle things?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. Obviously, we've sort of mentioned before, but yeah, the figures there could be slightly skewed. I'll make sure to have an update on those for you at some point. But yeah, you're right. We're a big exporter of scrap, but also a big importer of scrap as well. And I think the projects up at Lock Harbour now and Fort William at the smelter are going to support that whole the recycling philosophy, and the fact that they are developing a recycling plant alongside the smelter. That should be ready to sort of be announced within the next few months. I think I know we're talking about it within Alfred, and members are aware, and it's something that will be.
I've even read about it down here, so down under. So it is in the news, and I'll just go over that for viewers if they missed it. So the one smelter up in Scotland in Fort William is looking at putting a recycling centre alongside the primary aluminium smelter, because they've got good hydro, and they've got good wind capability to develop wind as well. And the other thing, that having recycling next to primary could enable them to capture the heat from the primary aluminium smelting and use it to preheat or even help the recycling process. So it's actually a nice ecosystem to put a recycling plant next to a primary aluminium smelter. It's part of the development of ecosystems, and especially if it's near a good source of renewables.
Yeah, certainly, and then it's going some way to really preserving that smelter as well, because obviously it's, like we say, it is our last and only smelter in the UK, and we want to preserve that. We want to protect it. There's a huge community built up around it, obviously within Lock Harbour and Fort William for a workforce. So it's a very important kind of to preserve that. But I think these kind of developments then exactly show the future of aluminium, and show that while we are then still producing aluminium, we are looking at developing ways that we can continue to recycle it and kind of make that run alongside nicely the production process, and hopefully in tandem with it as well, and make sure there are some even recycling abilities, like you say, of the heat waste and everything that's going on.
And have you got you've sorry, how many members? You've got 200 members. I think you said it earlier.
220 companies, I think, within Alpha.
And do you get, is there much on, I mean, obviously they've all got an interest in sustainability, but have you got any leaders of the pack that you could give us some insights to what they're doing, out there?
Yeah, I think there's some different kind of projects going on. So from a quite an interesting recycling perspective, within the UK, there's a relatively new scheme that launched a while back called Podback, and this is focusing around the return and reuse of aluminium coffee capsules. So one of our members, Tandem Metallurgical, have worked with the Podback scheme and some other technology providers to develop a specific machine that can actually then, when people send back their coffee capsules, they send it back in a bag, so you literally get it picked up from your doorstep. Someone will come and collect it. The whole bag can go straight into this machine. It's shredded. The plastic is reused. So the bag that's shredded is reused. The coffee is then, it's quite an interesting machine to see because everything's sort of shaken up, but all the coffee is then shaken out, so you can then reuse that within agriculture or it obviously doesn't go straight back into just your coffee cup, but the aluminium.
I tell you what, I've had coffee in cafes. I think it's been going straight back in.
You can taste it. And then obviously the actual aluminium pods are remelted back down and able to return to the system. So that was one quite big achievement to now look at obviously a trend and a growing trend in how aluminium is used, and making sure that aluminium is then the kind of material of choice for those kind of coffee capsules, and trying to move away from any sort of plastic. So that's quite a nice take on it. But then I think a lot of the other initiatives we're starting to see come through are looking at, like we say, this kind of query around embedded carbon within products. So we're really going to try and help work with members to work across the traceability of their products, and kind of showcase how that aluminium then ends up into the applications.
And the one thing, especially in the building industry, the embedded carbon, because it's embedded for a long time, and in some ways, as I said, is if it's embedded when they made the aluminium, when they smelted it, that process then means the metallic form is infinitely recyclable. Infinitely. That's one thing about it. It doesn't deteriorate. It's not like steel, it'll rust, and infinitely recyclable. So the embedded carbon is a one-off, and then those products in 70 years will be able to be only 5% of the energy. By then, we'll be getting that out of renewables and out of solar and wind and all of those things. Recycling plants don't have to run 24 chemical reaction like primary, so they can actually modulate energy, which you and I have been talked about modulation for a long time now. So how are you, So because some things with embedded carbon, if it's embedded for 70 years, or you embed it forever, because the carbon's never going to come out. The carbon was actually used to make electricity. So it might be embedded, but it's embedded forever, and you've got an infinitely recyclable material. So it's a one-off and spread over, hundreds of years. Hopefully it's been recycled for, hopefully civilization's going for hundreds of years. It's an interesting question how you're grappling with that, and how governments then view aluminium.
Yeah, I definitely think that this kind of question as well, from a life cycle analysis point of view, starts a lot with the manufacturers, but then also starts a lot with the kind of the OEMs and the producers of applications. So obviously the electric vehicles, like we say, into building and architecture, and how the aluminium can then be extracted at the end of life is a huge point as well, because obviously a lot of the vehicles that are now coming to the market are heavily using aluminium, which is great. They're obviously making use of the lightweight properties, but it's then how we make sure that aluminium is able to be extracted at the end of life, rather than then losing it into landfill and things like that. And similar with packaging, and I think the kind of packaging story is the best one. Obviously within aluminium cans, it can be from, you can finish a can, pop it in the recycling, and it's usually back on the shelf in 60 days. So it's really kind of highlighting those areas that we are then able to get the aluminium back into the system. But yeah, you're right. It's then looking at ways that we make sure it's either there for the long term and we're making use of it as a product that way, or we have those ways to extract it at the end and make sure we get it back.
I was at a metal recyclers in Perth, Western Australia, a couple of months back, and they were telling me how they recycle and get the aluminium out of engine blocks, complete engines, and they throw them in a shredder, and it shreds the engine completely into tiny little bits, and then they run magnets over it to take the steel out, and then all the rest of it is alloy, and then it's then remelted. But they, you can imagine the size of the shredder just shredding engine blocks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we have to do that. One of the, in January, I read the IEA report, the Energy Outlook 22, which is published at 23. Mm-hmm. And one of the things in the IEA report they said is that we are not going to be able to acquire enough metals, virgin metals, that recycling, and we'll be recycling things that we haven't even thought about. Now, you know, I've heard about people melting down computer chips to get the gold out of them, because the gold's really easy. You just melt it and it's the heaviest thing, it falls out. Yeah. But now we're looking at the silica in them, embedded in the computer chips, and the other metals as well. So everything, we're not going to be able to mine enough out of. We've got a finite resources of mining, and so everything's going to have to be recycled. And aluminium, of course, is an important part of that, and it will make up bits and pieces. What I'm saying here is that it's coming. Like, you know, the value of it is going to be. That's a great thing about aluminium. You know, there's a really good value to stock, even for kids collecting cans. I mean, you know, it's, you know, the prices it was hitting, you can get really, really good money for a ton of cans. Yeah. So yeah. So.
Yeah, I think on that, Geoff, as well, you're right. That's it. Not only will it be a case of us really having to work to recycle more aluminium, but making that the actual supply chain focus is that and closed loop focus will be that we're looking more at recycling of aluminium, but also then where we'll start seeing it in a lot more products. And I think one thing that I've had a lot more interest in recently and a lot more kind of inquiries into is companies that are looking, especially sort of gin distilleries and any kind of other kind of packaging areas where aluminium can be used. We've seen a lot more interest in them looking at aluminium bottles and actually switching from things like glass and plastic into aluminium, specifically for that reason, that they are aware. For
the recycling reason? Yeah.
Yeah, for the recycling, for the lightweight reason, for the fact that logistically and transport wise, it's easier to transport. There's no breakage like glass, but it's then sort of looking at actually ways from a consumer perspective as well, that we will start to see aluminium coming into our lives a lot more, and hopefully that will kind of create this impetus to then recycle it and to have more of that material coming back into the supply chain as well. So that'll be quite interesting.
And I had my first large can of water in Western Australia, an aluminium can of water, still water. Now, I've had soda water and sparkling water and stuff, but it was the branding on it was no plastics. Yeah, you know, and those cans are they weren't too much more expensive than a water bottle, but I was very aware when I was visiting that you couldn't top up a water bottle, because it said nobody can't drink the water. So you were buying lots of water. It was really hot. You got lots of plastic water. But it was interesting, the aluminium can starting to, you know, replace those cheap plastic bottles.
Yeah, and I think it's just very much a change in consumer attitude stuff as well. Because like you, I've had aluminium canned water, and it's a weird feeling because you click a pop a can and you expect it to have a fizz, or you expect it to have something. So
it's slightly strange the first time. Yeah. Pour it in a glass and it's okay. Drinking out of a can is actually a little bit weird. Yeah. Yes, I agree.
But then I think this was the shift when we saw, wine bottles changing to aluminium caps and closures and things, and there was a big uproar as to,
Yes.
it won't be the same as a cork. But actually, again, it helps to preserve the wine, and it's an easier, and it's now a complete shift. If I get a bottle of wine that suddenly has a cork, I panic and can't find my corkscrew. But yeah,
yes, well, I think it had a negative effect on women's health. I think that's a true thing. It's not me being sexist. The demographics for wine drinking shifted dramatically. So
and that was just
yeah,
lockdown.
and. Lockdown did that as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's changing in the way we see things, and I think if we can then kind of see aluminium as a product that is more readily available to consumers and is more easier to recycle, and we have that from younger generations up as well. I think it's just that education around how aluminium can really help support that kind of
and I think We'll wrap up here, Nadine. I just one more comment, because I think you might smile at this. The embedded carbon debate. There's an article recently down here in New Zealand that whether wool carpets or synthetic carpets, and wool carpets have a higher embedded CO2 than synthetic carpets.
Okay.
And so they're now saying wool in itself has a higher embedded CO2 than synthetic materials for clothes, and and then you're starting to get the debate, and the two carpet makers in New Zealand are suing each other over which has got the least CO2, because of course then you get into what happens at the end of life. Wool, the great thing about wool, it will decompose. It'll decompose. Composting is great. It can actually it can be recycled, but it's a natural fibre. Where the plastic's going to be around, it could be 500 years. And there's a and that's what that end of life. What do you do with it when you've finished with it? I think it's going to be one of the huge important things, and aluminium's going to be a safe material in that regard, despite its embedded carbon content. And as you know, I've talked for years on what primary aluminium smelting needs to do to tidy up and lower its CO2 emissions, and I think it needs to. It can't continue to be burning coal the way it is. Taking anything that's aluminium as a consumer is a safe option, because the end of life, whether you drink the can and finish it with it then, or you install it as windows or cladding on your building for the next 70 years, it's a safe option.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, like you say, it's just then having that kind of shift in mentality and shift in the awareness as to what it is these products are actually, these metals and these products can actually bring to a more circular economy. So I think from an outfit perspective, we're very much aware of driving the benefits of aluminium, but also kind of asking. We did a piece a while back that was, why aluminium? Why should we be using aluminium in certain products? Why is it the best choice and the metal of the future? But I also think it's very much of a case of why not? Why can't we look at aluminium in other certain applications and presenting it as
look,
sustainable material?
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time. It's your morning, my evening, and for the very first SIM-PAC Live show, and yes, I thought it was only appropriate you be the guest on the first show, and yes, and I'll leave you with one thought about aluminium, and that is it is my hope that aluminium's infinite recyclability is not used by the primary aluminium smelting sector for them to do nothing about their CO2 emissions, which are mainly all by power stations, because we know they can do something if they really wanted to. And so you don't have that problem in the UK. So so good luck, and we will see you probably in the Northern Hemisphere in September, I think.
Yeah, that sounds great. No, thank you so much, Geoff, and for all the work you're doing to kind of push this onto the agenda. It's really, really good to see. So, yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Good night. Thank you.